The man just got home when a beautiful woman appeared out of nowhere. She blocked his way, swaying her long legs, not letting him pass. The man clenched his teeth and walked through her. Young Min lay depressed in bed, unable to believe he fell in love with a ghost, his own Ji-hyun. Then Ji-hyun teleported in, complaining about abandoning the ghost taxi and earning money, leaving customers hanging. Now, Young Min was pretending to be dead in bed. After her complaint, Ji-hyun vanished angrily. Young Min got up to look for her, and Ji-hyun appeared behind him. Young Min didn't know how to face her, so he left the house alone. Ji-hyun anxiously waited at home with her grandmother until midnight, when Young Min had not returned. She wanted her grandmother to call Young Min. As if sensing it, her grandmother immediately called him. At that moment, Young Min was hiding in a bathhouse, saying he wouldn't come home, and then hung up. As he prepared to sleep, a man lay behind him and touched him suggestively, making the atmosphere tense. When the hand was about to reach his chest, Young Min sat up sharply. The man also backed away as if waking from a dream, recognizing him as Hwa Gong-ja. It must be the general causing trouble using his body again. Hwa Gong-ja quickly apologized, noticing Ji-hyun was not around and realizing there was trouble between them. Hwa Gong-ja told Young Min that two ghosts in love could indeed find release together, which was good for ghosts. Young Min urgently stopped him. Hwa Gong-ja warned Young Min never to fall in love with a ghost, as only souls with deep resentments become ghosts, and she had also lost her memory. Young Min didn't come home the next day. His grandmother couldn't reach him by phone, so she thought of contacting Jo-ri, as they had a good relationship, and she had always wanted to match them. Now was a good opportunity. Ji-hyun panicked when she heard they were together, unhappy about the situation. No wonder he hadn't come home all night. There was another woman with him. Her phone, which she possessed, was out of charge. Ji-hyun got angry, accusing the man of neglecting his duties for love. Just then, Young Min remembered his phone was uncharged and hurried home. Ji-hyun was quietly waiting for him. Young Min quickly charged the phone. Ji-hyun sarcastically commented on how different it is to meet a woman, looking pleased with himself. Young Min didn't say much because he had decided to follow Hwa Gong-ja's advice and say his final goodbye to Ji-hyun. The clothes he wore were Ji-hyun's favorite, now set to be a final gift. While on their date, Young Min called his friend, admitting he truly loved that woman, but she was about to go far away. His friend asked if he was letting go of the relationship, advising him not to live with regret. Being dumped after confessing and not confessing at all are different things. Young Min looked up at the building, unwilling to lose Ji-hyun, and decided to keep her. Both have now become ghosts. If the woman is willing to accept his love, they could ascend to heaven together. However, the woman decides to stay behind to help Young Min recover her lost memories. Seeing her determination, Kim Sin-woo warns her, "There's no future for a ghost and a human. If you truly want to regain your memories, you must not fall in love with Young Min." Kim Sin-woo continues, "Going on a date with my first love was my wish, and now it has been fulfilled." Before Ji-hyun understands what's happening, Young Min rushes over, thinking Ji-hyun was about to disappear with Kim Sin-woo. Unable to let go, he decides to confess his love, but he is too late. Kim Sin-woo disappears right before him. Young Min closes his eyes, unwilling to face reality, but Ji-hyun does not disappear. At this point, Young Min keeps his feelings to himself. To help Ji-hyun regain her memories, Young Min takes her to meet Hwa Gong-ja. He directly pulls out the phone possessed by Ji-hyun, then takes out a talisman. Ji-hyun is terrified, thinking Young Min is about to destroy her soul. Just as the talisman is about to be placed on the phone, Ji-hyun's powers suddenly erupt, and the talisman falls into the water. Hwa Gong-ja, distressed, retrieves it, having spent a lot of money on this talisman. Seeing Ji-hyun's reproachful look, Young Min quickly explains, "The talisman isn't meant to destroy you, it's to help restore your memory." Ji-hyun is then reassured. She places the talisman on her forehead. Outside the car, Young Min also harbors doubts about why the talisman flew away. Hwa Gong-ja warns him, "It's not good for a ghost to have power. Turning into an evil spirit can happen in an instant." Memories continuously emerge in her mind. After her best friend, who was pregnant, passed away, to uncover the truth, she goes to a detective agency called GB. Following the memories, they arrive only to find it closed. Young Min promises to find the detective for clarity. Ji-hyun is deeply moved. The detective used to call her Cop, suggesting Ji-hyun might have been a police officer, possibly linked to her death involving crime or something sinister. While they are puzzled, a young boy gets into the taxi. To find his missing sister, the boy rides in a taxi for ghosts. He can see Ji-hyun, the ghost, and knows the taxi helps ghosts fulfill their wishes. The boy says his sister is missing, the police suggesting she might have run away, which is impossible as she would never forget his birthday the day before. The taxi becomes his only hope. Initially reluctant, young Min softens at the sight of two pleading eyes. He takes the boy home. The note on the wall shows the sister was diligent and meticulous. The room is clean and decorated with numerous certificates. The boy says his sister and grandmother were very close, ruling out the possibility of her running away. Her disappearance must have another explanation. The boy had wanted a gaming console for his birthday gift. They visit a store where the owner confirms the sister did buy a console, accompanied by a short-haired girl. From the owner's description, the boy identifies her as Sister Ga-eun, who frequently visited their home. Though he doesn't know Ga-eun's phone number, he knows the supermarket where Ga-eun and his sister worked together. The boss warmly welcomes the boy, and under Ji-hyun's guidance, the boy skillfully pressures the boss, who agrees to call Ga-eun, but she doesn't answer. The next day, young Min goes to the sister's school and manages to stop Ga-eun before school starts. 3 classmates also arrive, busy taking photos and posting on social media. Ga-eun appears uneasy. Ji-hyun senses something is off. The atmosphere among these people is awkward. Young Min inquires about the boy's sister's whereabouts from Ga-eun. Meanwhile, a girl named Choi Mira keeps interrupting, seemingly afraid Ga-eun might slip up. Ji-hyun also noticed something fishy. Several people mentioned that the boy's sister had been acting strangely lately. Her grades had suddenly plummeted. Rumors were that she was mixing with boys, and even gossip suggested she was making money through deals. A girl nearby even pulled out a photo as proof. Ji-hyun saw Ga-eun's panic. She definitely knew something. Young Min told everyone else to stay out of it and asked Ga-eun what exactly happened on the day she bought the game console. Ga-eun, panicking, stood up and left the scene directly. It turned out that day they had witnessed the boy's sister's death. Ga-eun wanted to call the police, but Choi Mira stopped her. A girl was showing off the latest makeup products. A clerk suddenly appeared behind her, opening a black plastic bag containing alcohol and cigarettes, which she was too young to handle. Ga-eun looked at her with sympathy. The bullied girl trembled with fear. Choi Mira disliked Ga-eun's look, so she warned her. If Ga-eun didn't want to continue playing this role, she shouldn't pity her. Ga-eun quickly averted her gaze. Ji-hyun, standing aside, noticed the trickery. She teleported back to the car and shared her suspicions with young Min. Ga-eun was working at the supermarket to deliver alcohol and cigarettes to Choi Mira. The disappearance of the boy's sister was also linked to Choi Mira. While discussing, they spotted Ga-eun preparing to go home and followed her by car. Choi Mira saw this. Young Min stopped Ga-eun, hoping she would disclose the whereabouts of the boy's sister. Just as Ga-eun was about to leave, the boy's voice came from behind. Ga-eun eventually got into a ghost taxi. However, as a spirit, Ji-hyun's aura was too heavy, making Ga-eun feel very uncomfortable until the boy comforted her by holding her hand. The boy asked Ga-eun about his family. Heartbroken, he told her that his grandmother had been suffering since his sister's disappearance. Young Min knew she was worried about Mira's threats and reassured her. This place was absolutely safe, and she could chat freely without worrying about others. The boy also asked if Ga-eun knew of his sister's whereabouts. Ga-eun felt ashamed, just as she was about to reveal the truth, when Mira suddenly called. Following the address provided by Ga-eun, they arrived at the location. A man appeared from behind, asking if he was the boy's uncle. Upon young Min's confirmation, 2 men armed with weapons appeared. Looking at the arrogant trio, Ji-hyun wanted young Min to retreat, but the 3 were no match for him. One man said he shouldn't mess with Choi Mira and swung a stick at him. Young Min initially managed it easily, but his phone suddenly flew out of his pocket. To protect his phone, young Min had to passively endure the beating. The man noticed this weakness and targeted the phone. Fortunately, young Min blocked it with his arm. At a critical moment, 2 passing policemen appeared and quickly subdued the trio. Young Min then realized that Ga-eun had stopped the police car. On the way to the hospital, Ji-hyun scolded him for being too impulsive. How could he confront a baseball bat? What if it hit his head? She pushed a poor female classmate down. sighed heavily while flipping her hair, and looked extremely arrogant. Another girl, worried, ran over. After confirming that Ga-eun was fine, she boldly suggested calling a school violence committee meeting. Choi Mi-ra was very annoyed, claiming that living in a slum, they had no right to act self-righteous. The girl sneered. Choi Mi-ra's family was indeed wealthy, but she couldn't beat her academically and looked even more pitiful. Enraged, Choi Mi-ra and the girl started pulling each other's hair. Choi Mi-ra pushed too hard, sending the girl tumbling down a slope. The girl rolled down and hit her head on a rock. Everyone was terrified. They approached to check on her. The girl lay motionless. Choi Mi-ra, kneeling, pushed her and concluded she was dead. Panicking, she covered the body with dry leaves. Looking up, she found Ga-eun about to call the police. She quickly snatched the phone away and threatened her not to call. The next day, Choi Mi-ra had found out that Ga-eun had called the police and severely scolded her. At the same time, Young Min was printing missing person posters for the girl. Just as he was distributing them in the park, he suddenly received a call from the boy. The police had found the sister's backpack and a suicide note. Young Min hurried to the scene where the police were retrieving a body. Reading the suicide note on the phone, Ji-hyun sensed something was wrong. She had seen the notes the girl left for her brother, always signed as brother's sister, but this note only mentioned sister, and the phone wasn't locked, as if meant to be seen. It was clearly a staged scene. Meanwhile, Ga-eun was lost in thought over spicy noodles, remembering the girl's kindness towards her and feeling guilty. While feeling remorseful, she received another call from the boy. At the same time, Young Min and Ji-hyun were at a deadlock. The police had concluded it was a suicide. They wanted to help but were powerless. Although they knew Choi Mi-ra was cunning, they were helpless without evidence. Just as they were despairing, they found Ga-eun waiting at the boy's house. While a school beauty was bullying the girl, another girl approached and threw a full cup of coffee on the bully. The bullied girl was stunned. This was Ga-eun's desperate counterattack. She had had enough of Choi Mi-ra's disgusting antics and threatened her with hot coffee next time. Afterward, she took the bullied girl away from there. The counterattack did not end there. She told the two from the ghost taxi that Choi Mi-ra had indeed killed someone and hid the body on the school hill. They hurried there. If the girl was really murdered, she would become a ghost due to resentment. But regardless of their calls, there was no response, suggesting the girl might still be alive. In a rush, Young Min nearly fell down a slope, but a strange force surged into his palm and Ji-hyun managed to grab him. They were shocked by everything. A voice sounded nearby and Ji-hyun teleported over. The girl was there, still breathing but cold as ice. They immediately took her to the hospital. Dr. Do-gyu-jin tried his best to revive her. While they anxiously waited, the grandmother and the boy finally arrived. Young Min explained the situation to the grandmother, who was so worried she nearly fainted. The girl's heart stopped, but Dr. Do-gyu-jin did not give up. Despite his efforts, her heartbeat did not return. The nurse called the grandmother aside. Just as she left, the sister's spirit appeared. All three were unable to accept this. The girl tearfully thanked them. Without them, she could never see her brother again. Her wish was to see him once more and wish him a happy birthday. After fulfilling her wish, she disappeared. The boy cried uncontrollably, and Young Min could only hold him tightly. Even though Dr. Do-gyu-jin fought hard, he had to face reality. But just as he gave up, a miracle occurred. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. The next day, the girl woke up. The grandmother was very grateful to Young Min for saving her granddaughter's life. She tried to give him a stack of money, which he did not accept, knowing the family was not well off. The boy hugged Young Min tightly. Ga-eun entered the hospital room feeling very guilty, but the girl did not blame her. She took out mixed noodles from her bag, a sweet memory for both. With the girl safe, Choi Mi-ra was sent to a correctional school. It was a perfect ending. In their spare time, Young Min devoted all his attention to Ji-hyun. He not only changed her mattress to an ultra-soft one, but also improved her workstation using his grandmother's skills. Together, they enjoyed the fresh scent, the air filled with the sour smell of love. She thought of what Kim Sin-woo had said before. If she fell in love with Young Min, love would replace her resentment, and she would ascend to heaven. But just at that moment, Young Min started his confession. He wanted to hang a love lock at Namsan with his girlfriend and wished to go with Ji-hyun. Ji-hyun immediately rejected him, saying she was already dead. Dead and living people could have no future together. Still, Ji-hyun ended up at Namsan with him. Seeing Young Min about to draw a heart, she quickly refused. As they were not a couple, Young Min wouldn't listen. A man hanging a love lock alone drew laughter from those around. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Do Gyu-jin coincidentally passed by. Ji-hyun remembered she had once sought treatment from him and even asked him out. Young Min quickly showed the doctor a photo of a girl, and the doctor recognized her. While Byung-chil was working, he suddenly saw an 80-year-old grandmother by the roadside and rushed over to question her. The grandmother became flustered upon seeing Young Min and stuttered without knowing how to explain. Angry, Young Min worried about her health deteriorating at such an age. The grandmother said she was busy and they would talk at home. She then bashfully greeted an old man across the street. Young Min noticed this and was at a loss for words. Despite her embarrassment, Young Min had no choice but to stay with her until work ended. That evening, he urged her to quit her job, fearing she might faint again. However, the grandmother outright refused. When Young Min asked if she was dating, she angrily stood up and left, promising to quit her job. Ji-hyun couldn't stand it and didn't understand why he was angry with his grandmother. Elderly people also have the right to pursue their happiness. Young Min knew deep down that his grandmother wanted to earn money to help ease his financial burden. The immediate crisis was averted after paying off the interest, but repaying the principal was not easy. Ji-hyun worried for him upon hearing this. It seemed the ghost taxi would never cease operation. Yesterday, from Dr. Do Gyu-jin, Ji-hyun learned that she had indeed been a police detective before her death and thought it was cool. She returned home, imagining fighting with villains. In her room, she discovered Young Min researching her online. Ji-hyun was touched. Yet it was strange that there were no reports of a female detective's death online. The next day, Young Min took Ji-hyun to the police station. He wanted her family information because her death and his mother's were on the same day. The police refused him, rightly saying Ji-hyun's family had just come to terms with her passing. She couldn't reappear and disturb them. Young Min, not wanting to see Ji-hyun hurt, then approached Hwa Gongja to ask what spirits liked. Hwa Gongja was furious, but then thought it might be a good thing. If Ji-hyun fell in love with Young Min, her love would dissolve her resentment, allowing her to ascend to heaven. No wonder Ji-hyun had refused his confession. She had known all along. Ji-hyun hadn't regained her memory, and he couldn't let his feelings cause her to leave. So he decided to bury his feelings completely. The next day, he was deliberately cold to Ji-hyun and left without her. A man then stopped a taxi, but as soon as he sat down, he noticed an old lady in the passenger seat. Thinking it was a shared ride, the driver quickly explained that the woman was his mother with Alzheimer's, forcing him to work with her. The man also recalled a TV report about a driver working with his demented mother. He thought it was just a normal ride, but the passenger was truly disgusting, saying old people should just die. The driver couldn't tolerate it anymore. He stopped the car and sternly told the man to get out. She couldn't carry such a passenger. The driver completely disregarded the consequences of refusing a fare. She yelled at the man to get out of the car. The mother nearby was terrified. She didn't know why her daughter was so angry. The man complained to the taxi company. Shouting, he demanded the manager come out. A woman gently comforted the frightened mother. Wang Mao, hearing the commotion, rushed over. He represented the company. The man angrily pointed at the woman. The driver allowed sharing but then refused my ride. Because of her, I missed an important business meeting, he claimed, threatening to sue her for financial losses. This is clearly bullying an honest person. Wang Mao didn't care about the man's threats. He had seen the dashcam footage. It showed the man saying many unethical things. He planned to post the video on social media. The man became scared. Being a businessman, he knew exposure would lead to boycotts. He would surely go bankrupt. At this point, the man could only sincerely apologize. The kind woman forgave him. Meanwhile, Young Min, hiding his feelings for Ji-hyun, left her and went to the hospital. He asked Jo-ri about Ji-hyun's cause of death. Jo-ri said she was brought to the ER that day, treated, and then moved to the ICU, where she died from cardiac arrest. Young Min thanked her, then asked for Ji-hyun's family's contact details. Jo-ri refused to disclose patient information without thinking. That night, back home, Ji-hyun looked unhappy. She asked Young Min where he had been. Young Min lied about handling an urgent matter and apologized. He said he had forgotten his phone and blamed her for being aggressive. Ji-hyun was speechless. She thought about it all day. Though unclear about those fragmented memories, all clues pointed to the hospital. She wanted Young Min to accompany her there. Young Min had just returned from there. No matter what Ji-hyun said, he refused to move, deliberately using a cold tone. Ji-hyun was heartbroken. Seeing Ji-hyun cry, Young Min panicked. Eventually, Young Min took her to the hospital. At the same time, the drivers gathered together. An uncle claimed he had seen a ghost. The three others laughed. The man with a middle part boldly challenged, "If there are ghosts, let them show up." He took over the night shift from another man. Soon, he spotted a female passenger roadside. He stopped to pick her up, but she teleported into the car. A puff of smoke caught her attention. In the next second, the smoke formed into a man. The two were shocked. They had seen many spirits, but this was a first for such an entrance. Curly said he wasn't a malevolent spirit. He stayed because he had someone he wanted to meet, having been there for 5 years. Ji-hyun was delighted because he knew the hospital inside out. Curly recognized them as the famous ghost taxi, known among spirits for fulfilling their wishes. Broke, he asked them to help fulfill his wish. Ji-hyun immediately refused. Young Min was deep in debt. They wouldn't engage in a losing business. Curly offered hospital information in exchange. Young Min immediately agreed. Ji-hyun was confused. Young Min told her, "Drive the ghost taxi and pay off the debt slowly. You are what matters most." They struck a deal. Curly shared his wish. He wanted to find his daughter, Sarah. After his wife's death, Curly raised her alone, which was harder than expected. He left her with his sister due to work commitments. Suddenly one day, she went abroad to study without telling him, her father. That's when he realized how much resentment she must have harbored. Now she wasn't even in contact with his sister. Curly hoped they could help find Sarah, but they only had her childhood photo. Finding her would not be easy. Curly mentioned another clue. He was a detective before he died. His partner seemed to know how to contact Sarah. They hurried to the police station. Unfortunately, the officer was on vacation. They couldn't get the contact information. Young Min had no choice but to leave his mobile number. Elsewhere, 2 car accident victims were rushed to the hospital. The doctors immediately attempted to resuscitate them. However, despite their efforts, the man's heart stopped beating. His soul left his body. Seeing the woman next to him unconscious, he was extremely worried. They had just gotten married today. He wanted the doctors to save his wife. Unexpectedly, a doctor walked right through him. Before he could react, the doctor pronounced him dead. He couldn't believe it. They had just married after much difficulty. He tried to hold his wife's hand, but grasped only air. He wept helplessly. This whole scene was witnessed by others. The love in his heart dissolved all resentment. The man vanished on the spot. Back home, Ji-hyun realized everything. Young Min was cold and didn't bring his phone because he was afraid he would disappear. Ji-hyun admitted she too kept her distance for the same reason. But today, after seeing the newlyweds, she understood that even if they loved each other so much, they would eventually part. Ji-hyun told Young Min she wanted him to always be by her side. Young Min naturally agreed. From that moment, they decided to live without regrets. That night, Ji-hyun kept thinking about their kissing scene, happiness written all over her face. Young Min couldn't sleep, regretting that his confession wasn't cool enough. Neither slept all night. Today was their first date. Young Min dressed up neatly. His grandmother noticed right away. Reluctantly, Young Min admitted he had a girlfriend. Upon hearing about the date, his grandmother was more excited than if she were going on a date herself. She immediately helped him dress up. She took out a long stored toner and patted it on Young Min's face vigorously. Then she styled his hair into a greasy middle part, which was quite unattractive. She changed it to a more fashionable style. Seeing his clueless look, they shook their heads until they settled on a straight fringe. Regarding his outfit, his grandmother had him wear his most expensive clothes. When Young Min walked out the door, he was very nervous. Ji-hyun held back her laughter. Although speechless, she was very happy inside. After all, Young Min wanted to make a good impression. She didn't ask him to change, but slightly adjusted his look. She tucked his collar in, took out a pocket square, and his grandfather's leather belt. Young Min was thrilled. He had finally found a girlfriend, though she was a pet from his car. Young Min spent the whole night planning the best date. Knowing he was financially strapped, Ji-hyun insisted on going to the Han River. Young Min was not happy, despite it being a very important day. Ji-hyun told him to cheer up. Having such an understanding girlfriend was a blessing he must have earned in a past life. While walking, Young Min insisted on holding hands. Ji-hyun tried, but it didn't work. They had managed to hold hands before. Ji-hyun thought she hadn't adjusted her state properly, so she focused deeply and tried again. But it was still the same. Failing to hold hands on the first day of dating felt like a huge failure. Hwa Gongjia had said, "Spirits in love ascend to heaven." Why wasn't Ji-hyun affected? Young Min felt she didn't truly love him. Neither of them backed down, resulting in a big argument. The sweet atmosphere was instantly shattered. Both returned home unhappy. Grandma finally waited for Young Min to return. She asked him excitedly how his date went. Young Min said it was uninteresting because the girl doubted his sincerity. Ji-hyun felt the same and went straight back to her room. Grandma felt helpless. After all this time, he finally went on a date. But it ended like this. Then, Young Min met with Hwa Gongjia and asked why Ji-hyun, having fallen in love, did not ascend to heaven. Hwa Gongjia suggested 3 possibilities. They were not truly in love. She was a powerful evil spirit incapable of love. Or she existed beyond the spiritual realm. Young Min wanted to ask more, but a dark cloud suddenly attacked. To help a ghost find her lost daughter, a ghost taxi brought the spirit to a cafe. A police officer was invited there. Ji-hyun froze, and on seeing the officer, she burst into tears, her heart aching immensely. With no memory of her past, how could she know that this officer was her biological father? Ji-hyun couldn't bear it. She went through the window and appeared next to the car in the next second. Young Min, sensing something was wrong, asked the officer to wait and approached Ji-hyun with concern. Seeing Ji-hyun gasping for breath, Young Min told her to rest. He returned to the table where Curly, his former partner, was crying inconsolably. Young Min wanted to repay Curly and asked about his daughter's whereabouts. Curly echoed this, hoping he could help find his daughter, Sarah. The officer said Sarah was living in the US, making a meeting impossible. Just as Curly was saddened, the officer added that Sarah was actually in Korea, having learned this from the news. Curly was thrilled, knowing he would meet his daughter the next day. In return, he revealed a secret about the hospital. A nurse had placed very dangerous drugs in a locker. Curly didn't divulge more, but Ji-hyun sensed it was a crucial clue. The next day, the 2 people and 2 ghosts attended a robotics seminar. Curly finally met his daughter. After the meeting, he approached her eagerly. How could Sarah see her father, a spirit? The officer greeted her, and Sarah recognized this uncle but was unfriendly. When Young Min mentioned her father, Sarah cut him off, saying she didn't want to hear anything about him and prepared to leave. The officer stopped her and handed her a USB drive that her father carried daily, saying if it were to be lost, it should be by her hand. After saying this, the officer left. Young Min stopped him and revealed that her father's spirit was here. Sarah, a scientist, didn't believe him. Young Min apologized on Curly's behalf, regretting not being able to give her the strawberry cake she liked. Sarah turned and left but believed Young Min's words. She went to a secluded spot to open the USB drive, filled with memories of her and her father. At that moment, her resentment vanished. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Curly was filled with self-reproach. His daughter held resentment towards him. He didn't feel like a father. The next day, the group returned to the venue. Curly decided to leave, satisfied seeing his accomplished grown-up daughter. But then, danger struck. Sparks flew overhead as a spotlight fell directly towards her. The woman was unharmed, and the man anxiously asked if she saw it, but she couldn't see because her father's spirit had saved her. The accident made her feel her father's presence, perhaps showing he wasn't as heartless as she had imagined. The next day, she took the initiative to meet with Young Min. They met at the columbarium. Looking at the family portrait in the cabinet and the first prize-winning piece beside it, Sarah asked Young Min if their father was also with them now. After receiving a positive response, Sarah told their father that she had once resented and disliked him, the old USB he carried, the robot in the cabinet, and his action of saving her yesterday, which finally made her understand. Yet Sarah still didn't understand if work was really that important that he had to leave her in their aunt's care. From now on, she would no longer hold any grudges against him. Curly was inconsolable, expressing his gratitude and love to his daughter. After giving her a final hug, his soul was finally liberated and disappeared on the spot. Sarah sensed something and couldn't help but burst into tears. That evening, they went to the hospital. With Jo Ree's help, they checked the nurse's locker but found no dangerous drugs, as Curly had mentioned. To investigate Ji Hyun's origins, they visited Kim Jong-woo's home. They arrived only to see a mysterious woman at the door, her transparent legs revealing she was not human. As they walked past, the woman opened the day and asked them to help find Kim Jong-woo. Her legs restored, and a face without features startled young Min.